This is a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online, the online resource for all construction professionals that is available 24/7. Please don't forget to subscribe at the place you usually get your podcasts so as not to miss a thing from the second series, as well as visiting our YouTube channel. Hello again and welcome to another podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. As usual, Barney, my red Labrador, is here to offer his advice and to keep an eye on proceedings. And by the way, Barney and I would really appreciate it if you would write a review. If you're new to Duncan Cartlidge Online podcasts, welcome. Please don't forget to subscribe, as well as catching up with the previous episodes. If you are already a subscriber, thank you for your support. Before starting this episode, I'm going to get on my soapbox. This week I came across a post on LinkedIn which contained a copy of 2 of my books for free distribution, as well as offering free PDFs. The sites have now been reported and hopefully blocked. If you come across similar posts, please report them to the host platform. And now, in this packed episode, we'll cover a wide variety of topics, including draining the swamp, more about moths and the RICS president, it's the story that just keeps on giving, net zero for existing commercial buildings, and payment problems, potentially important developments. So let's kick off with draining the swamp. As a quantity surveyor with over 50 years' experience in construction, I have followed the Grenfell inquiry with disbelief. I remember the Grenfell fire well. I was returning from the Isle of Skye with Barney after a short break, listening on the car radio while the scale of the tragedy unfolded. During my professional life, I have sat on many pre-contract meetings and assumed that the regulations covering the integrity of the building and the safety of the occupants was in safe hands. Or was I just naive? It now appears that I was. It is now apparent that contractors were able to exploit the regulatory regime to evade accountability with fatal consequences. It also seems that my assumption that contractors and subcontractors are competent, conscientious, and know what they are doing, something that I have discussed in a previous podcast, is wrong. It appears, and if correct, this is truly disturbing, one of the recommendations of the government is to make it mandatory for fire risk assessors to have their competence verified by an accreditation body, which presumably up to now it hasn't been. I was horrified to learn that up to this point, unqualified individuals could make critical fire safety decisions. Can you imagine any other field where this could happen? 2 cladding fitters who had worked on the Grenfell Tower admitted that the quality of some of the work was shocking and unacceptable. In the mid-1970s, I watched a disaster movie called The Towering Inferno, in which fire breaks out in a new 125-storey tower block due to faulty design and poor construction. Cinemagoers were reassured that nothing like this could ever happen here. In its response to the Grenfell Inquiry report, the government is proposing several measures to, and I quote, create a thriving, professional and skilled workforce. Well, good luck with that. While increased regulation is welcome and entirely necessary, even though it will not be implemented until 2028, a consequence of greater regulation seems to be delay, as continues to be the case with the Building Safety Act, due in part to the failure of the building safety regulator to recruit any technical staff prior to the Act going live, just as if they hadn't had sufficient warning. Incidentally, get your applications in now for the new super regulator or the Chief Construction Advisor. Only 3 years to go. And while on the topic of dubious practice, in my last podcast I drew attention to Bent Fleidberg and his belief that many international megaprojects only get approval because of the smoke and mirrors accounting at the feasibility stage. Well, Bent may have a point, as this week it was announced that the total cost of HS2 could now be approaching £80 billion with no accurate cap on the final figure, with some sources predicting it could be as high as £100 billion. According to Rail News, the project is now damaging the reputation of Britain. The Public Accounts Committee added that neither the Department of Transport nor HS2 Limited currently have the skills or capabilities to make a success of the programme, noting that gaps have emerged in the past concerning such things as risk management, project management and project controls. But now moving on to the story that just keeps on giving. It's been quite a few weeks for Justin Sullivan, the newly elected president of the RICS. As discussed in the last podcast, he was recently heavily criticised by a High Court judge whilst giving evidence as an expert witness in a moth infestation case, as his submission appeared to have been prepared by someone else, which apparently is a real no-no for expert witnesses. Currently, Mr. Sullivan will be lauding it at Mipin in Cannes in the south of France, where he is representing not only the RICS, but also his practice. Perhaps you saw the post in LinkedIn recently. Some have questioned whether this is strictly ethical. The Sullivan case has been widely reported in all the technical press and even made quite large spreads in the Sunday Times and the Daily Telegraph, although the papers didn't mention Sullivan or the judge's comments. Well, now it's decision time, and there have been calls for Sullivan to resign, be sacked, or try to tough it out in the coming weeks. We'll see which of these options is taken. Lem Bingley, the editor of Property Week, suggested 3 possible options. Sullivan fesses up and resigns. Sullivan is persuaded by the RICS Governing Council to quietly leave by the back door. Or Sullivan is voted out by the Governing Council, having a public vote. There is a 4th option, of course, and that is to tough it out and to have some sort of RICS internal inquiry. But surely, after the Sean Tompkins affair, surely not. Apparently, the RICS employs over 700 staff, with a large proportion of them in the Standards and Regulation Department. If, like me, you were taken aback at the increase in your annual subscription, it was announced this week that up to 100 jobs are at risk at the institution, which has started a 30-day redundancy consultation with staff as part of a wholesale review of the organisation, being overseen by the Chief Executive Officer Justin Young. Yes, another Justin. However, if you think this could result in a reduction of headcount and fees, think again, as it is reported that the institution wants to put up to 50% more staff into the UK regions, at offices in Birmingham, Belfast, Cardiff and Edinburgh, and also around the world, while better supporting local branches. An RICS spokesman commented, "The consultation process RICS is undertaking is an important part of a comprehensive review of the organisation as we continue the journey to transform the RICS. Our vision is focused on the principle of delivering exceptional experiences for our members. However, early last week it was announced by the RICS that Justin Sullivan would be stepping down as president amid a confidential review into his brush with the moths, and an acting president taking over pro tem. And yes, the RICS chose option 4. What a farce. and from one farce to another. Net zero madness. Back in 2007, it was proposed to introduce energy performance certificates, or EPCs, along with home information packs in England and Wales. It was intended that the home information pack, or HIPs, and EPCs would be mandatory. At the time, the potential income from carrying out this work, and in particular the home condition report, was thought to be considerable, and hundreds of people from all backgrounds scrambled to become qualified home inspectors and energy assessors, in some cases giving up their existing jobs and investing tens of thousands of pounds in courses run by organisations such as Sava in Milton Keynes. At the time, it was estimated that 3,000 inspectors would be needed, and I became an assessor for Sava programmes. However, many people's dreams were shattered when it was announced in July 2006 in the House of Commons by Yvette Cooper, yes, the now Home Secretary, that home condition reports were no longer to be mandatory, which just left EPCs, leaving the newly qualified home inspectors raging. At the time, it was reckoned that carrying out EPCs could be a good little earner at between £150 to £200 at 2006 prices per EPC. But after a few years, the price for domestic EPCs fell to around £30 or less, and people abandoned the market. EPCs haven't gone away, however, and as part of the government's net zero plans drawn up in 2021, offices, shops and other commercial properties must have the highest EPC ratings of either A or B from 2030 onwards in order to be lawfully let. Now, no one denies that operational carbon emissions from existing stock is a major problem, but thousands of commercial properties across the UK could be a risk if landlords decide compliance with the new regulations just isn't worth it. Just like the car industry and the enforced electric car targets, net zero threatens the property markets, particularly for older properties. Some estimates put the percentage of properties that need significant investment to upgrade to the new EPC ratings as high as 85%. And of course, it's not just about the cost, which could run into millions of pounds in some cases. Tenants need to be moved out and planning permission may be needed. And of course, once completed, the cost of the upgrade works will be passed on to the tenants. The targets have been heavily criticised by the British Property Federation, calling the timescale completely unrealistic. Let's hope for another U-turn in the form of more time to achieve compliance. And perhaps the prayers have been answered, as there are signs that the UK government, under increasing pressure to balance the books, may be reining back from their net zero agenda. And now onto an old chestnut in the construction industry: payment problems. I'm sure that everyone in construction is acutely aware of the industry's reputation when it comes to payment and the use of pay-when-paid scams. In a podcast last year, I described the case of Providence Services versus Hexagon Housing Association, which centred around a contractor, Providence Services, terminating their contract following the housing associations repeatedly failing to pay interim certificates or delaying payment without any apparent cause other than to be vexatious. In brief, the housing association failed to pay 2 invoices for a total of over £600,000 on time for a JCT16 design and build contract, and in consequence the contractor issued notice of termination and walked off the job. This was much to the annoyance of Hexagon, who claims that it wasn't necessary or appropriate to terminate the contract under the circumstances. The circumstances, let's remind ourselves, not being paid over £500,000 in outstanding invoices. The matter was referred to adjudication, who found in favour of the client. However, the case was later referred to the Court of Appeal, and you'll be pleased to learn found in favour of the contractor, to establish an important precedent. At this point, I thought justice had been done, but the Supreme Court granted permission to the Hexagon Housing Association to appeal, and it has anticipated this will be heard later this year, the outcome of which could have great significance. The Supreme Court will determine whether a contractor's right to determine a contract is legal in circumstances where the employer has repeatedly failed to make payments on time. It will also clarify whether a contractor can exercise the right to terminate and walk off-site immediately without having to give the employer another warning or the opportunity to pay. As somebody who's been on the wrong side of non or poor payment, I know how frustrating it can be to constantly ring accounts payable asking for payment. If the appeal is given in favour of Provident, it will be a mighty blow for contractors and subcontractors working in an industry where poor payment is the norm. Watch this space. Finally, before Barney and I go, a recent survey conducted by the CIOB amongst 16 to 24-year-olds indicated that a career in construction was not discussed in nearly 50% of interviewees during their careers advice. Popular images by those surveyed to describe a career in construction were working on building sites and careers for men. Seems as though the message is not getting across. Well, folks, that's all for this episode. I hope that you found it interesting. Thank you for listening to the end. This has been a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. Barney and I would really appreciate it if you were to spread the word, subscribe, and, if you have time, write a review. Until next time, take care and watch out for myths. They can be career damaging.